Alice is presenting her thesis work. She's graduating in December from the Social Justice and Human Rights Master's program here. Alice came to Kenya in 2013 as a part of our undergraduate field studies program. And it was there that she got immersed in some research projects that we've undertaken as a community, and we're just embarking on expanding into more researchers, graduate students doing research in collaboration with the community on their own, so not as one big group alone anymore. So Alice basically is the first person from this community to come over to Kenya to do a research project on an issue of importance to the community, where the community gets to co-design the question. So she did an amazing job with this research and writing it up now, and it's a very exciting project in my opinion. And so this is Alice. Thank you, Mary. That was a lot better than my intro. So we'll just go forward now. Do the next slide. There we go. So just to orient us, West Africa, and this is obviously Kenya. And if you go in one more, actually. Thank you. So Kenya is this area right down here, where this little mini map is called the Masai Mara, and specifically the Masai Mara Game Reserve, so MMGR, you're going to hear me refer to it as that. And this area is globally known for the wildebeest migration. So it is a huge tourist destination because it's considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. And the wildebeest go up and down, go into Tanzania as well. So this area is really important for the wildlife, and as well as a host of various cultures and things like that. So we can go in one more. So here is the Masai Mara Game Reserve, this line here, and these other outlined areas are conservancies, which is what the research was based around. This town here, Talek, this is where camp is. This is where Mary and Maidway has set up camp for present college students to stay there in the summer. So as you can see, we're literally surrounded by areas with conservation goals. This conservancy, Alada Mothorogi, used 2 conservancies. Used to be Alada Arok on the southern part and Mothorogi on the top. So you may hear me reference Alada Arok, and that's what I'm talking about, that area that I'm talking about before they merged. And they only merged on a managerial level, so it didn't actually affect, it really didn't affect anything except for management. So it didn't affect the local communities that they merged. Just wanted to point that out. So you hear me say conservancies a lot. Perhaps you've heard of wildlife conservancies, private conservancies, or community conservancies. Although these are technically different things, the nuanced differences we discovered on the ground really just didn't show up. So I'm just going to be saying conservancy, and that's what I mean. And I'll talk about more about the definition and the structure in a minute. And like I said, this entire ecosystem is a really rich place in many, many ways. And because of this, it's really important to conserve. It's really, and this is something that everyone that was there over the summer, everyone said, like, we want this land to be conserved. It's a very real threat and a very real conflict that people are selling their land to outsiders, and then option for agriculture, then fences go up. And fences is something that is very new to this area, so that has the power to drastically change the entire ecosystem as well as the culture. So that's a very large concern that people are thinking about, and so that's why these conservancies are here, is because, yeah, with that goal to conserve the land. Yeah. So I worked with the Masa Education Research and Conservation Institute. It's MERC, and this is the institute that Mary and Maidway Oladapash created. And Mark Olakasoy is a friend and colleague of mine who I studied with the first summer in 2013. He was a student with us, and then this past summer in 2014, he joined me with this research. So he and I were the ones to do the interviews and things like that, and he was really an integral part of this research because he helped me, like I said, set up interviews, he helped me translate when necessary, and aided in my understanding in larger social and cultural and ecological contexts. So in 2009 to 2011, May was part of organizing the community to shut down a lot of Roque Conservancy, the one I mentioned earlier. And they wanted to shut it down because a lot of Roque Conservancies started beating people up when they brought their cows onto the conservancy. And after beating them up, they would put them in a container, a shipping container, with no water, food, light for a time. And so this is like a major important backdrop to this research. And that's not happening anymore, and it's not that we found. Yeah. So, but May was successful in shutting down the conservancy with the huge community organizing that happened. But it didn't actually last very long, and I'm going to get back into that later, why it didn't last as long as everyone was hoping. And this violent past, like I said, is just a really important backdrop to understand why these questions are so important to answer. Questions like, what is the conservancy structure? How does it work? Who's in charge? What is the current relationship between the MMGR and the conservancies? What is the relationship with the local communities? So these questions are coming from the community, and they're so important because of this violent past that has happened. So it's something that, so it's a way to figure out ways to like navigate this new system that has shown up in the Masai Mara. Let's see here. Yeah, so what is a conservancy? This is my own definition, very basic, a partnership between tourist companies and local communities with the goal of conserving ecosystems. And ecosystems is very important. Conservancies usually go for places that are rich in wildlife or like some kind of like very important habitat. It's not something that shows up randomly. It's something that they show up in very specific places. So they show up right outside the MMGR so that the wildlife then have a wildlife corridor and extends the amount of land that the wildlife are then using. You know, they're not just going to show up anywhere in the country. It doesn't make sense. So they are known for two things. They're known for ecotourism and community-based conservation. Ecotourism is considered responsible travel to areas that conserves the environment and improves the well-being of local people. Community-based conservation is to incorporate improvement of the lives of local people while conserving areas through creation of national parks or wildlife refuges. That's the definition used in the U.S. In Kenya, it's not wildlife refuges. It's a conservancy. So these are kinds of objectives and that the conservancies that we are studying strive for and often use these kinds of things as major selling points in advertising. So if you go to their websites, they are always talking about like, yeah, we do amazing community projects, and that's why you should come here and don't visit the MMGR. You should come here because we aid the local community. You should come here because we don't destroy the environment like the tourists have, like the tourist companies in the MMGR. Things like that, literally like saying that, comparing it, and things like that. So missing from, like this is a common dialogue that's happening globally. Conservancies have this really positive light. But missing from this dialogue is the local community's voice. In many ways, they are marginalized within this conversation as the current academic literature completely invisibilizes the landowner's experience. There's literally nothing in academic literature that talks about the landowner's experience with conservancies. It does not exist right now. Soon to be exist. So this research project was aiming and is aiming to create a platform for these voices so that we can learn about the true relationships that conservancies are creating. And what was found is very different than the common dialogue that exists today. So the conservancy structure, keep going. Before I keep talking about it, the conservancy structure is very confusing, so please just hang in there with me. And it's one of the main questions that May posed to me was like, what is the structure? Because we don't really know. The community didn't really know what's going on because it's not talked about. So there are three main entities, and this graph simplifies it. They're landowners, who are Maasai individuals who own 100 to 150 acres. There's the landholding company, and then there's the management company, which is synonymous with the management board or the board. And the management company or the board, they have the highest decision-making power in the entire conservancy. So how the process works is this. Landholding company goes to landowners and ask them to sign a lease. And this lease says that the landowners will move off of their land and they will not use the land in any way for an exchange for a monthly rent of money. And the rent is agreed upon. The landholding company has like a set rent in the lease, and it goes up every year. It depends how many acres leasing. Yeah, good. I'm related to. So the leases are often in time frames. They're always in time frames. 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years. Often they start at 5 years, and before the 5 years are up, they ask you to sign another lease for 10 years. Before the 10 years are up, they'll ask you to sign another lease for 15 years. Things like that. Then, once the landholding company has enough landowners to have a large chunk of land that with nobody living on it or using, they make a management agreement with a management company. And this agreement allows the management company to do all the decision making. The management company is made up of two things: the landholding company and the camps that exist on the conservancy. This is making sense so far, okay? So the camps, for example, a lot of Motorogi has 5 camps. And this is great, so there's 5 little squares. So each camp. And that represents, each camp gets one representative on the board. So each camp decides who's the representative. They go onto the board, and they're the representative on the management company. And then the landholding company gets 5 representatives. This is just for a lot of Motorogi specifically. Although it's a similar structure for all the conservancies, the board specifically works a little bit different for each one. So then the landholding company has 5, the management company has 5, and then they have 1 independent. Then the third entity that I'm just going to touch on here is a conservancy trust. Almost all conservancies have a trust. And the trust gets $5 a bed from the camp. So if I was going to go stay at a camp at a conservancy, $5 of my couple bucks goes to the conservancy, and then the trust then uses that money to do community projects, meaning water projects, boreholes, solar panels on schools, water collection on schools. It's usually around water in schools. Yeah, women's like literacy is really, those are the 3 like common things. So one thing I didn't mention is that each camp, like the beds with the trust, pays $2 to the management company per person who stays at the camp. That $2 gets into the pool, and that's where the rent money comes from for the landowners. So the management company is in charge of the money. Yeah. So any questions about that? Any clarifying questions? Because it's important to get that. And this was not really known before in terms of we didn't really, it was kind of graph, and it was hard to. Yeah, Zoe.
So the landowners who've rented their land for 5, 10, 15 years, they're living on other Maasai land that is the beneficiary of these conservancy trust projects?
They're living usually in towns. Usually they're pushed into towns. Yeah. That's
exactly. These regional camps are sort of the point or the way that they're generating revenue is through ecotourism.
Yes, it's 100%. Through tourism. And I'll show you a camp in a minute too. Yeah.
And at what point in time did the land around Amara become privatized?
Well, that's really interesting. The land, okay, well, depends on how you want it. Mary probably better, a lot better.
How did they get those title deeds?
The title deeds, the landowners or the conservancy. The landowners were given 100 to 150 acres by the government. It was just disseminated out, and even if you weren't living on the land, you would still get like a title for land that may have been like way on the other side of the Mara. So that's also a thing, Zoe. They may have rented land that they were actually never living on because their title was and then originally the titles didn't really matter because they were still living really it's pastoralist economy, so not with like civic borders and things like that. And then now it's mattering anymore.
Yeah. What are the rents like?
Let me get into that.
Okay, so that's a really important point I think that you just made. The privatization just has been happening rapidly in the last 20 years, but still 99% of the people have been using the land communally, even though they own the title until this phenomenon, right?
Yeah, because all of a sudden you can't even have someone else living on your title land, because then if I leased out my land and Jen was living on it, then Jen has to leave. And I would be the one getting in trouble if Jen stayed on it. So that's really confusing, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I was just curious, who kind of controls the trust, or who decides how the trust spends its money?
Yes,
It's not
that's a
really
great
linked to
question.
the-
It's a board. It's a board of 4 people. A lot of Motorogi. I got to talk to the manager of a lot of Motorogi Trust, and he's a dude who lives there and gets all this money and just pretty much decides what projects to fund and what not to fund. He says there's a lot of community input. It's debatable.
The land holding companies, are these usually, are they like international corporations? Are they?
No, they're
Headquarters-
100% Kenyan citizen owned,
Okay.
and that is for legality reason, which I'll get into later as well. They are Maasai owned land holding companies.
Okay.
So they're local, technically.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But I mean, at least the way it's set up legally.
Yes.
Yeah, man, that's.
Yeah, and yeah. So is there anything else on like specifics, and I'll just keep going. I think a lot of questions will be answered. Good. Okay. Let's go next slide, please. Oh wait. Yeah, whatever. Let's do it now. So example, a lot of Motorogi has 277 landowners that have signed leases. This means that they have 32,900 acres of a conservancy. So just to give you like it's a huge amount. And they have 5 camps on this conservancy. So therefore they're able to, and they have a 94 bed max for the whole conservancy. So it's really small amount of tourists. That's high-end ecotourism, to say the least. And that means one safari vehicle has 2,100 acres. So that's a huge selling point that they're pointing out. They always advertise this on all of their websites. You won't see anybody else when you're driving around here because, we pushed all the people out. So yeah, let's go to this website, and here's an example of an Alada Motorogi camp. It is amazingly nice.
Oh
It
my
is
God.
$600 in the low season, and it's $1,200 in the high season.
A night.
Per person, a night. And that comes with all food and 2 safari visits a day. 2 safari trips a day. Safari visits.
So,
So it's really nice. And this is high end, but this is not like out of the norm at all for any of the conservancies in the area.
so is this a place where people would hunt?
No, there's no.
Okay.
I mean, no, no. Technically, no. I mean, I don't think there was any poaching happening specifically. I mean, no, we didn't really look into that specifically, and nothing came up. No one ever told me that was happening with tourists. It does happen. And there are like these more shoddy camps that will come up in MMGR specifically for hunting, and the Ministry of Tourism talks a little bit about that and his issues and having to shut down those camps quite often, but not in the conservancies. The conservancies are really about conserving wildlife. They really want to, and they do a good job of that. There's no doubt that they are conserving wildlife. So yeah, that's just an example to give you guys all some perspective.
This is really interesting, Alice. So people, these places exist so that people can go and hang out in a wildlife setting.
Yeah.
And look at the animals.
Yes. And they're also supporting community-based conservation.
That's awesome. $1,200 a night? Yeah.
And
that's-
when I say
that's
high season during the migration, because the migration is such a big phenomenon, and it is absolutely beautiful and amazing.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
No doubt.
That's-
Okay, we can go to the next, back to Prezi.
You're gonna
Oh, I
stop.
didn't. Yeah,
Say
Renee.
how much they were leasing them per acre.
We're gonna get into that. I've got okay, so we can go to the next slide. So for my methodologies, I used Linda Smith a lot. She, in her book, Decolonizing Methodologies, and she was a guideline and teacher for me throughout my research. And this quote, I think, really sums up a lot of it. Research is not an innocent or distant academic exercise, but an activity that has something at stake and that occurs in a set of political and social conditions. This quote shows that research does not exist in a vacuum of reality, and this quote and Smith's myriad of theories are especially pertinent because I was doing research with an indigenous community, and I am an outsider, specifically white American outsider, which has a host of things to have to think about. But because I was working with Merck and with Kasoy, and the most important thing, going off the community's questions, that's why I consider this decolonizing research and methodologies at work. I also I also used Fanon and Cabral quite a bit in my thesis. I'm not going to talk about them today, but they've completely cracked open the conversation of decolonizing as we know it today, so they're important. And community-based conservation and David Western. David Western is globally known as an expert on community-based conservation, Maasai culture, and Maasai economy. And his writings have produced conservancies today. Therefore, it's really important for my thesis and my research to understand where he's coming from. Because although he doesn't often write directly like conservancies should be this, this, and this, he has these blueprints of ways to conserve land while in community-based conservation. And it happens to be that those are conservancies. So, like Mary mentioned, this is the first independent researcher and the first research of its kind about conservancies, because really the research that exists today does not take the critical analysis of conservancies. And on top of that, what we were doing is using the landowner's experience to do a critical analysis of conservancies. So I also did interviewing. And I did interviewing because there's no other research existing on this, so I had to do interviewing. And interviewing is fascinating. It was the first time I had done it. Yeah, it's really interesting. And the themes that Mary and Nadine and I came up with this list of questions that I asked each person, sort of, things changed during the interview. But the themes were around culture, conservancy structure, current relationships, and vision. Questions like, do conservancies empower the local people? Are you satisfied with the financial benefits from the conservancies? What is your vision for the Masai Mara, and do conservancies play a role? We did a total of 14 interviews, and this included conservancy managers. 2 conservancy managers include landowners from multiple conservancies, community liaisons, and also 2 very special people we got to interview was the senior game warden of MGR, James Olasendio, and the Ministry of Trade. Well, I was focusing specifically on the Ministry of Tourism and Wildlife, but it does a lot of other stuff. Honorable Alan Olatwala, and these 2 politicians, it was really great to be able to talk to them, because we got to ask them about how conservancies are affecting the entire county, which they do, so that's interesting. So some surprising finds. There was a lot of things that came out of interviewing, and something that I found really interesting was how open one of the managers was to me, and just really flat out telling me all sorts of things that I would consider, disregarding of basic human rights. So there are multiple ways that people were being forced to sign leases. One of these ways, because people obviously have a choice to sign a lease or not. Well, yeah. The color's not coming through, but see these like rectangles? Sort of?
Yeah.
They're, okay, great. They are unsigned. This isn't a boy show. This black line, this is conservancy land. And those are unsigned titles, so that means that people they've decided to not sign a lease for various reasons, mostly because the rent is way too low. And so we got to talk to a man here who didn't want to sign a lease, and yeah, well, so the manager of No Boy Show told me what he does when this happens is he moves his ranger bases to completely surround the surrounding parcels. So these 2 are here, and he's moved this one to here, so it can watch these people and these people. And he told me this. And that way, when a person or any of their livestock cross over that 100 or 150 acres, they immediately get fined. And this is a lot of money. It's like 5,000 shillings, 10,000 shillings, Kenny shillings. And so that's one way they do it. They do have an access road. The Conservancy legally has to give them an access road, although they've had to be pushed to do that. So an access road meaning leaves each parcel and goes to the outside of the Conservancy so that they go to town and things and see other people. But they cannot leave that road. So it's extremely strict. In a pastoralist economy, it is literally impossible to live on 100 or 150 acres with any amount of livestock. I mean, maybe like one goat, but no, that doesn't work. So that's one way that they were forcing people to sign leases, this huge amount of pressure. other way was through community pressure. One community liaison told us that he often go, let's say this person didn't sign this, that's the guy we talked to, Communia, and he, another person from the Conservancy goes around to the other community who has signed a lease and tells them, you know, this guy's not signing a lease, the Conservancy may not live anymore, it may be shut down, we may not be able to make rent this month, we really don't know what's happening with these people not signing these leases, like, we don't know if we can survive anymore. And next thing he knows, he's got elders in his community coming to his door crying and telling him that he needs to sign a lease because they can't send their kids, their kids are already at school and they need to send in more school fees soon, that they need to put food on the table. And so that kind of community pressure is outstanding and has definitely worked to get multiple people to sign a lease. And this man, Ole Kamemia, he even posed the question, does that mean it's a privilege to not sign a lease? Because some people are completely reliant upon the rent, and some people aren't. Maybe they have a job somewhere else. All right. So another really surprising find was loans. Another way they were forcing people to sign leases. The landholding company, before they had many people who had signed leases, they would have these big meetings, and they would put a stack of cash in front of each seat, like a table, and tell them, sure, you can take it. You can pay us back later, no problem. Of course, we're taking it. And then a month later, 2 months later, the landholding company comes back and says, you need to pay us back that loan now. People don't have the money. And they're like, well, if you want, you could get money from this lease. If you sign this lease, then you get money every month, and then you can pay us back with that rent money. So another thing is, yeah, it's really angering, and it obviously just disregards human rights, like in terms of choice. So another thing we found was disappearing leases. Every single one we talked to said they have never seen a lease after they signed it. There is no copies anywhere. They just have no idea where it is. And this is ridiculous because it means that the conservancies and that the landowners don't know what they are not allowed to do. So the conservancy management could be doing something that's not written out in the lease, therefore illegal, but the landowners wouldn't know because they don't even have the legal document to prove that it's illegal. And of course, when I talked to the managers, they gave me leases without a second thought. Which is awesome. So there's a huge influence on culture as well. One of the most really heartbreaking things that we learned was in a document about a meeting about the conservancy people were all hanging out and having a meeting, and there was like a vision section at the end, and one of those visions was we hope to see all Maasai people living in towns, and that they then will become completely reliant on rent. And that way there's more land for conservancies, and they'll be on the rent. So pretty much, if you're relying on rent, then you can't say anything bad about the conservancy because they can take your rent away so easily. So speaking of rent, do the next thing. Here is a conversion that I did of rent. This is in Kenya shillings per hectare per year. And in the end, for 100 acres, I converted it to US dollars and acres, just so it makes sense in our brains. Per month, it's $120 that allotted for 100 acres. So per year, that's for 100 acres, it's a little less than $1,500. As you can see, Naboisha is almost half that, and that's because when I said allotted rock was shut down by Maiden in the community there, they came back with offering twice the amount of rent. And their rent is exceptionally high compared to all conservancies in the entire area. Naboisha's rent is much more average. Everyone we talked to, even conservancy management, said the rent was too low. Yeah, Todd.
So just out of curiosity, what's the average income? What's in Kenya? Like what do people make?
I don't know what the average income. Do you know what the average income is?
Well, it's more useful to think of things like school fees because a lot of these people are not have no income. They're living off of pastoralism and school fees. Though, even though primary school is supposed to be free, you have to buy enough stuff that it ends up being $500 a year or so. But boarding schools are twice that for one child, and then you have to pay for secondary school, so that's where this money's going.
Sure.
It's school fees, yeah.
And that doesn't even cover those.
It doesn't even cover,
those fees.
no, not even for
Okay.
2 of your kids.
Yeah. So here's some other major discrepancies that I found. Yeah, what time was this? 1:45?
Got 15 minutes.
Okay, cool. So grazing in a pastoralist economy is extremely important. Being able to graze. There's a cow there. You can't see it. Trust me. And what we found out was that conservancies, all the conservancies in the area, have some kind of grazing plan, which is really important and a very, which is good. It's very good for the people because they're able to still graze their cattle. Actually, just the cattle, you're not allowed to bring on a conservancy. However, what we quickly found was even from hearing from the Latimer manager that they have an amazing grazing plan, very holistic, takes account of the whole ecosystem. We open up 1,000 acres, we let in as many cows as they want. Grass is this high. They take the cows out when the grass is this high, which is good grazing management. Everyone who grazes animals knows that you don't want the grass all the way to the ground because it's really hard for the grass to come back after that. So then they open up another section and the cows go there. So this is like holistic rotational grazing. That's what that's called. However, we talked to a landowner from Latimer and he said he drove by one day and he saw all these cows in there and he's like, why are those cows in there? They're not supposed to be grazing there right now. And he quickly found out it was a friend of a friend of a friend from the management board. So it's a very political tool that is used. Yeah, so this also shows the lack of transparency that's happening. The lack of transparency is an overall issue, just from top-bottom issue. You don't really know. As landowners, they don't know what's going on in the management board. They do one annual meeting, one AGM. Each conservancy does one AGM a year to kind of try to help, help be more transparent, but it ends up being, I've heard that they're not very helpful in the end. And they're also on the boards, like I mentioned. A lot of Motorgi has a 5 for the camps, 5 on the landholding company. However, one member from the landholding company passed away almost 2 years ago, and they haven't filled that seat yet. So now it's a 5-4 board, and shows huge commercial interest that's completely taken over the board, and the board is the highest decision entity on the conservancy structure. So, yeah, that goes into high commercial interest. Something that people kept asking me was, can you find out how much money they're making? How much money are these tourist companies making by using our land and our culture? You know, they're very much so selling the culture with the land. And that's something I definitely asked and tried to find out, and it was always diverted and never directly answered. But May, he worked on shutting down a lot of rope. He got to look at the finances, and he remembers seeing that about 20% of all profits are going to landowners. Only 20%, and about 5% to the management board. So the rest of that money, the rest of 75%, is just going back to the camps. And all of these camps are European camps. There's like 2 that are U.S. Yeah, so it's all, these very, literally taking from this culture and the land and extracting these profits and bringing them back home to the West or the core, or, yeah, so it's a very similar tactics using colonization, right? I mean, it's, yeah, so also the landholding company taught, this was one of the most, it's really interesting to learn this out because in Kenyan law, you cannot lease land unless you're 100% Kenyan citizen. So that means that these European tourist companies cannot legally lease the land from these individual Maasai landowners. Mm-hmm. Therefore, they created the landholding company to be 100% Maasai and they're the ones on the lease agreement. The landholding company is on the lease agreement, not the management board or conservancy. So that's why the landholding company even exists, is for legality reasons, and also this huge commercial interest at its root. Because at first, the landholding company seems like it has a lot of power and influence with the structure because it's kind of this middleman, and it could have a lot of power and influence. But after learning that it's this huge commercial interest actually created the landholding company, literally picking people and saying you're going to create the land holding company. They're probably